We are Margaret and Greg Edgar. We are volunteers out of the state of Arizona. Excited to be with you here today. This is our 11-year-old son, Declan. We are here today because of him and his 6 siblings. Protecting the principles that will be enumerated throughout this summit are crucial to defining the America that he will inherit from all of us. So standing here today to talk about those principles and how we can employ them back into our society is crucial in my opinion. We're excited today to introduce you to a panel on the changing media landscape, misinformation, and the battle for reality. I think we can all admit that media has changed the world that we're living in already, and it's just going to continue to do so. And we have experts today moderating our panel. We have Andrew Regalado, Senior Organizer at the Horizon Project. He's joined by Aaron Rupar, independent journalist and publisher at the Public Notice newsletter. Dude, that was good. That was a notice. I can read, I promise. Wyatt Sharp, 17-year-old host of the Wyatt Sharp Show, who began his career at 11 years old. And we're also joined by Sophia Nelson, founder and CEO of Redefining Freedom Center of Virginia, and author of the forthcoming book, Redefining Freedom. In an era of deep division, these experts will discuss how we can navigate a fractured information environment and find a shared reality. Please join us in welcoming our panelists.
All right, y'all. Let's jump right into it. I want to give each of you a chance to answer the same question up front. What is happening right now? How are you capturing it? And where are you sharing it?
I'm happy to start on that. I think one of the things that's happening is the demise of gatekeepers with media, where even when I started working as a political journalist covering national politics 10 years ago, there was the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and people read those papers regularly, and it was kind of like the currency of the dialogue that people would have about politics. But now I think, especially for younger generations, people are getting their news from a really diffuse set of sources, from influencers, TikTok, YouTube, and so oftentimes we're kind of talking past each other because people aren't engaging with the same set of facts or trusted sources. And so it really becomes difficult in an environment like that to break through to kind of a broad-based audience, and so we're all kind of siloed. And I think that's one of the frustrations that people have, in consuming political news is, who do we trust? And I think that's even compounded now by the rise of AI, where people are getting deceived by videos that they're sharing, and so I think it's on news consumers to be more vigilant in making sure that they are engaging with trusted sources that are reputable. And I think it's something we need to think about, kind of educating students, media literacy skills in schools, so people have tools to determine reliable information from bad information, credible sources from sources that aren't credible.
I would maybe just build on that too by saying I think amongst people in my generation in particular, it's really unprecedented that people have access, as Aaron pointed out, to news in such easy, kind of accessible ways. And so for young people, that's meant that they can be more informed, but it also means that they're more kind of susceptible to misinformation and disinformation. And one of the things that has been happening recently is kind of the rise of online digital media voices like Aaron, and of course that's what I'm trying to do as well. And obviously there's a number of positives to that, and I think one of the things, though, that people do have to kind of balance is the fact that some of these online digital platforms don't always have the same level of credibility. Oftentimes what's, kind of sells, so to speak, on these digital media platforms is different than what might sell on kind of traditional news TV media, because on the traditional side of things, they very much value credible sources. On the digital side, sometimes what it comes down to is whether or not, people are willing to watch it. And in order to do that, unfortunately, sometimes things things are clickbait. Sometimes things are only put out there because they know that psychologically speaking, people will want to click on it and then they get tricked into it. And so I think right now people kind of overall are trying to balance that. And in a media world that moves so fast, it can definitely be difficult. But I think seeing everyone here in this room today, even as well, is kind of proof to the fact that there is still hope and that people can think for themselves, regardless of how kind of, again, unprecedented and fast-paced our media environment is moving.
I think for me, I would frame it like this. You know, it's been said a lot throughout this conference that we are in our 250th year, and we are. So 1776 was about what? Freedom. It was about those inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. 250 years later, in 2026, we here have to be about responsibility. And I think the Governor Christie was speaking about this, and there is nothing that is dividing our country more right now than the information ecosphere. And funny story, we were in the green room in the back talking, and somebody somewhere mentioned something about what the media was like 50 years ago. Well, I was alive 50 years ago. None of these other people up here were, just saying. And I'm sitting there and I'm telling them, yeah, you know, 3, 6, and 10, those were our networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, that was it. And you had Peter Jennings, or you had Tom Brokaw or Dan Rather, and that's who you watched every night. And they were consistent, and they didn't do what we do now. We didn't have pundits. We didn't have talking heads. I bring that up to say, because I think the framework matters. Of a certain age, people watch very different news than young people like this gentleman sitting next to me. And that is part of what is pulling us apart. And so I think that for me, as someone who writes for 2 traditional news outlets, I was also mentioning to my colleagues that one of the pieces I did just last week for Forbes on the Epstein files, that piece got yanked offline when it went up, and the editors pulled it back and spent another 2 days re-editing it because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, of doing the wrong thing. Does it get a lawsuit from you-know-who that lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? And the point is that our republic cannot withstand this, a free democracy like America, the one that we live in. If we cannot even agree on reality, and that's where I really want to pause this, reality versus the republic is the argument we need to be having, because right now we can't even agree on what real facts are anymore. We don't know who's telling the truth, who's a lie, which network is better than the other, which one is more liberal or more conservative. It's causing problems, as we all know. So that's kind of where I'd like to park it and just say that as someone who, again, writes for 2 major traditional outlets, my editors are more skittish now. They're more nervous. They're more concerned. They're paying attention to what kind of content now, and they want to tamp it down more because they're walking a tightrope. So the free press isn't really free anymore. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. So it's very clear, everyone agrees there's a problem. Y'all are all coming from different angles. And so this 24-hour news cycle, it seems like we always have to react to it. It's unrelenting, it's constantly going. Could you guys talk about how you approach it? Like, a big news happens, you have to go on air or write something or look at your phone. What is your first step?
I think I'm trying to be as intentional as possible, because I think right now in the media landscape, people feel as if, as Andrew pointed out, they have to comment on everything. And that's led to an increase in polarization across the board, because so many of these voices who are online and who are digital, oftentimes they are opinionated and they're partisan one way or the other. So as soon as news happens, their first kind of inclination is not, how is this going to impact different segments of the population? Instead, the perspective is, well, I'm this party, I'm this color, this is what I have to say in order to respond to this. And it's really unfortunate because I think that creates an environment where there is less kind of structured dialogue. So for me, when I go and whether there's breaking news even happening yesterday, of course, with the Supreme Court ruling on tariffs, whenever there's big news like that, I always try my best to say, who can I book on my show or who can I talk to that will bring something new to the conversation, but that will be principled and that will have a position that is, even if it's grounded in ideology, that's not the only backing behind it.
Yeah, and I think it's important, especially with the way that Trump uses social media to spread disinformation, to try our best to fact check when we can. And sometimes that's at tension with the desire or the impetus to be first and to have quickness with commenting or even sharing what he's posting. But that's really tricky. I mean, he had a press conference about the tariff situation yesterday where it was a fire hose of lies at times. And so I trust that my audience broadly is savvy enough to know that when I quote him, I don't feel the need to necessarily debunk every single lie that he tells. But I mean, how many times has he lied about the 2020 election? I mean, do we still need to put in parentheses every time that the election was not stolen or rigged and that Joe Biden won? So I don't pretend to have perfect answers to that, but these are really kind of conflicting priorities that we have, where you want to be quick, you want things to be timely, but you also want them to be accurate and provide enough context so that people who aren't immersed in political news like we are, that most of the people here are, don't get deceived and don't get snowed by misinformation. So that's a really challenging thing with the environment that we're in these days that I think is really different from the pre-social media era.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it depends on what hat I'm wearing. Am I in my pundit hat? Am I on my Twitter hat? Am I on my journalism hat or professor teaching hat? And I think that, again, everything they both said is right. You want to be principled. You want to fact check. One of the things that disturbs me about so-called media now, there's no fact checking anymore. And again, this even goes to those of us that write for magazines or papers or whatever. It used to be in the old days, there were a ton of people hired that actually literally went and checked kind of line by line and went, not just the links that you put in the hyperlinks, but there was fact checking. So we've lost that now. And so I think that like yesterday's tariff decision is a really good example how all of us who are lawyers, and particularly constitutional lawyers, were scrambling to try to parse through the document really fast, right? And try to pick out like, okay, who did what and what did who, and then get on and start talking about it. So I think part of the problem is, and I think we would all agree, is that because everything moves so fast, that it's really easy to get it wrong. And I think that has really contributed to the damage and the pull and the division that we see in the country.
So then, who sets the standards of truth? Is it the political class, the president? Is it journalists? Or is it really just on all of us that we really have to have way more agency today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an active fight. And, I think you can even go back to, 2020, 2021, when Twitter really put a priority on fact-checking, where they would, I remember some of Trump's lies about the mail voting in the run-up to 2020 would get tagged by Twitter for being misinformation. And even those kind of minimal efforts have gone by the wayside now, where, I think there's a mentality that people have where more speech is kind of a solution to misinformation and you can correct people. But because there's so much misinformation, and because, again, like with AI, with people sharing videos that are deepfakes, which I see more and more of, who is the arbiter of that? I mean, with a deepfake, it's pretty clear, when something isn't a legitimate video, you can point that out. But, it's not always so kind of cut and dry. And so I think that's like a very active fight that's happening in society, that we don't really have one arbiter. And the sources that I think we could broadly agree are credible, like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, fewer and fewer people are reading them. And especially like with the Washington Post, they just laid off like half of their newsroom. So they're doing less than they were able to do a month or 2 months ago. So I think that's a really active battle, but I think that's kind of where, trusted independent voices can be really valuable for people. As traditional media declines, that, myself, I've been doing this for 10 years, so I know that people trust me, and I take that seriously to not disseminate misinformation or get the facts wrong. But that's challenging when you want to be quick as well. So I think that's really kind of something that we're sorting through, but I think independent media has an opportunity there where if audiences trust you, you can step in and fill that sort of role that maybe 10 years ago was filled by more traditional sources.
I think it's unfortunate. I mean, as Aaron points out, whether it's with the Washington Post or other examples where media is in a pretty sorry state in some ways with respect to layoffs and other things. But one thing that I don't think anyone else my age would say, but I'm going to say it, and that is I think local news is very important as well, because if you have disaster happening, even if we look to Minneapolis and what's happening with immigration and customs enforcement right now, local news, those are the teams of journalists and producers and those in the field who know these local communities best. And so when national news outlets want to understand the situation, it's great that they'll send their national teams to these areas, but the local teams, they're the ones who know the local corner store business owners. They're the ones who are very much involved in the community. And so again, it's unfortunate because I think right now people are just so drawn to being as accessible as possible with respect to getting their news, looking on their phone. And so that unfortunately sometimes means that local media and local news gets left behind. So I would just say, to all of you that by supporting local news, I think that's valuing truth in many ways as well, but it's also, in many ways, you're going to get the best information from there because that's where kind of the voices are that people know and the people that understand the communities the best.
So again, let's frame this. Corporate media is a huge issue right now. All of the major networks, all of the cable networks are now owned by, whether it's Time, Discovery, or Paramount, or whoever, you name them, and they're Larry Ellison. So you got people who have allegiances to one point of view or the other, and those networks are being shaped by that corporate stock price being driven, that share we have to kind of adhere to what our bosses want versus the freedom of the press that we should have. And you just have to look at Don Lemon, look at Jim Acosta, look at Joy Reid, and those that were part of that media ecosystem and then broke off on their own or were let go or forced out because they were on air speaking uncomfortable truth that corporate media doesn't like. Because again, lest we forget, the President of the United States of America has sued or threatened to sue and then settled for tens of millions of dollars. And if I'm on the network board of directors, I don't want more lawsuits, so I want to keep him happy. You see the problem with that there? Because the free press can't be free to do its job. There's no way in hell we ought to be where we are right now, and the President of the United States had a press conference like he did yesterday and attacked the Supreme Court, called them scumbags, people he appointed, and said the vile things that he has said to female reporters, calling them piggies and all these things. The Epstein files rife with you name it, and nobody asked the question. And they do it because I have friends who work for these networks. They're like, I'll lose my job. How? I mean, that's what we're not talking about. So the arbiters of truth are we the people.
Thank you, Sophia. You said something profound, this concept of privatized media companies. So acting like they own which stories need to make it out to the public or not. And since when I started working in Congress, it became this thing that politicians couldn't start talking about something. And I started in conservative politics. So Republicans at one point stopped commenting on immigration issues. And now I work in civil society and I see pastors, veterans, doctors, also feeling like if I talk about something, I'm going to be coded too left or too right. Tell me a little bit about, do you all feel like there's certain issues you can't talk about on your platforms?
I mean, I would say in particular amongst young people, maybe just to start as a young person who is involved in politics, one of the things that I think the pundits and politicians and the media often do is they attribute young people as not caring about politics or feeling apathetic about politics. And I think this kind of comes down to the fact that young people, it's not that they don't care about politics, it's that they feel disillusioned towards the political system. They feel as if, as Sophia and Aaron have both pointed out, as if a lot of kind of what happens in the political sphere is not intended to incorporate their voices into it because it is so polarized and it is just in many ways people talking at each other instead of talking with each other. And so, in the context of what Andrew was talking about, I think right now media will choose which stories to publish based off of what they think will resonate resonate with their viewers. And going back to the corporate media example, you have MS Now on the left, you have Fox News on the right, and there's no true corporate media who is actually focused on doing what a journalist should do, which is break news, answer and get the facts and ask tough questions. And so that's what I think the focus should be on right now. And frankly, I think that's what the majority of people do want, even if some of the platforms like Fox News and MS Now and whatever, if they do get a lot of views, that's one thing. But I think their viewership is going down very quickly, and in large part that's because people are looking for good, credible, and kind of truthful journalism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I have to pull any punches with my audience in terms of stories that I can't cover, but I do think on the Trump point that one of the niches that I fill is presenting Trump kind of unvarnished to my audience, which I think, this is one of the reasons that I feel like he won in 2024 was if you tuned into CNN or Fox or even read about Trump's rallies in the New York Times, they were sanitized, where Trump would go on this unhinged rally talking about sharks being electrocuted or whatever. We can think of a million crazy things that he said during the campaign. And you read the New York Times, and it's like an economic speech. Trump talks about inflation, and they don't want to be kind of pigeonholed as being biased or being liberal. So there's kind of that urge to whitewash what he says and make it more sensible than it really was. And so I think there's a lot of power in me using my platform, which I've done for a decade now, and just kind of presenting the unvarnished truth of Trump to people. And that in and of itself, I think kind of tells more truth about him than a news write-up, which is a very traditional way of covering politicians, but I don't think really does Trump justice. So I'm fortunate in that with my audience, I don't feel like I have to shy away from certain stories or there's certain things that are like taboo. But just in terms of the platform that I have, I think that's one value add that independent sources can have that I think corporate outlets feel constrained, or they feel like if they do that, that's going to cause problems for their brand.
Well, I can speak from a unique perspective. Principal's first conference, not last year, but the year before last, I talked about the free speech issue and what you can and can't say. And of course, I was a professor at a Virginia university, and I let off a tweet that caused a firestorm that was unbelievable, asking a question in the context of Christian point of view, and it upset the LGBTQ plus community at my college, and all hell broke loose in ways that were unbelievable. I mean, not only did I lose my scholar position, but death threats, all kind of vile things being said, called all kind of names that I wouldn't repeat here, and being told that I had made people feel like they were unsafe and whatever. A tweeted question on my personal feed, not on campus, not at the university, not anywhere near students, and offered happily to talk about it, but was smacked down very hard, and it absolutely has a chilling effect on you wanting to go near controversial things or even do the most base things. And I had to really work through that and, realize that if you're going to teach in a university in this climate, you probably should shut your social media account down. If you're going to work at a job or in a law firm or do those things, you probably shouldn't have a social media account, and definitely not be someone that writes opinion columns or anything, because like you talked about at the outset, it's not just the corporate media. Now it's in our universities, now it's in our churches, it's in our places of work. Everybody has social media policies now, or what you can and can't say. So what I think, we're kind of like the frog in the pot, and the water's been boiling and we're all asleep, because it is everywhere, the censorship, the what you can say, what you can't say, what will happen to you if you say the wrong thing. And that's not the America I grew up in, and that's not America.
Well, thank you all for your resilience, just fighting the good fight out there in the world of journalism. And Sophia, we're sorry you went through that, but we're happy you're here back to share it with us. So I want to make sure we turn to the audience. We talked a little bit about audience development, not straying away. So we're turning it to y'all. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and someone will bring you a microphone, I believe. And don't hold back. What's burning over there? All right, right over here. Awesome. So I will repeat her question. She's saying, how do the audience as readers discern in this moment information that they're seeing?
I mean, I think part of it comes down to understanding the difference between what a journalist actually is and who you're getting your information from, because I think a lot of what happens right now is people have kind of the tendency to just slap the label on themselves and call them a journalist, despite the fact that they're actually, a political commentator, which is important in many ways. It helps fill kind of the void and helps people understand certain issues as well. But journalists, they have a couple of different jobs. They break news, they ask questions, and they get the facts. And if you're not doing those things, that's fine, but then you fall into the commentary gap. And so I think people need to be careful to make sure that they are getting their news from people who are true, genuine journalists and not people who fall into that commentary kind of lens. And again, it's not saying commentary is not valuable. It is. It, can help people kind of understand and help shape other people's opinions. But journalist versus commentator, I think, is an important distinction in that.
I would agree with him. I'm an opinion columnist, and you should not come to me for the breaking news of the day. You should not come to me for what's happening in Iran or something like that, because that's not something I may have an opinion about it, but that's not fact checking. It's not real journalism. And I love that you've made that point 2 times. And I hope you put up a big banner somewhere that says what a real journalist is, because we don't have that anymore.
And I'll just point out that it's not a new problem. I mean, I remember in the 2016 presidential cycle, logging onto Facebook and being appalled when I'd see my aunt sharing something from like patriotusa.maga.com, these sites that were clearly, I think that was part of the Russian interference campaign too, is setting up these kind of like sock puppet news accounts. And so in some ways, I think it's gotten a little bit, maybe even better than it was, 10 years ago when it was so new that people didn't know the difference, where if they saw something that looked like a news website, they kind of assumed that it was legitimate. So it's just kind of, it's going to be different for every news consumer, but I think it is really kind of building those relationships with the people that you're reading, especially if they're independent, and hopefully that not getting burned by them spreading misinformation, but then over time coming to trust them and including them as part of your news diet.
We have another question over there.
Yeah, hi. I want to kind of just start off, as the parent of a teenager, what you're doing is awesome. Don't let anyone say that you don't have any right to do what you're doing, just like someone who's been doing it for a while. So really cool there. The question I have for you and for the panel is, we have a group of people out here that remember the good old days. I'm a Democrat. I remember disliking Republicans and Democrats from decades ago. You cater to an audience that doesn't know any different. So what do you think your audience, when they're of voting age even, or 10 years, is going to think of today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think a lot of what happens right now is people who don't understand Gen Z and who don't understand the needs and the wants of young people, they have sometimes a tendency to just go with the easy solution. And I mean, I'll give you an example. Australia recently decided to ban social media for those under the age of 16. You're seeing this as well with artificial intelligence, where the kind of default solution is saying, we'll just ban these technologies. And I think what I would kind of plead to people in the audience, but also people who are watching at home, is this idea of let's understand before we jump to conclusions. And so in the context of social media or in the context of AI, maybe it's regulating these technologies, or maybe it's actually introducing classes in school to help people understand, help young people understand how to use some of these technologies responsibly. And so I think all of this comes down to just making sure that people have the tools and the resources they need, again, before jumping to some of these easy default solutions that happen so often.
Yeah, and I would just point out that, if you're Wyatt's age or even a few years older, Trump seems normal to you, right? I mean, he's been on the scene for a decade, so if you're a 20-year-old, I mean, this is kind of what you understand politics to be. And so I think for people...
It's problematic, too. I'll
right.
just say. It's very problematic in a number of ways, because I think young people now have become kind of accustomed to this idea that if they're getting involved in politics, this is what they're getting involved in. And so what happens as a result? Young people, when they get involved, they think they need to turn to social media and post tweets or post things on Instagram in the same fashion and in the same kind of demeanor that Trump does. And then obviously people wonder, why is the political climate becoming so polarized? It's because of that. It's because those are the figures who are defining what the political climate looks like.
Yeah, I would just agree. And I think, again, those of us, again, who are over, let's say, 40, remember a different politics, politics has always been nasty and messy and bad. It's never been pleasant. But I'm old enough to remember when having a lady sit on your lap and somebody took a picture of it. Gary Hart ruined your presidential aspirations. Now, we're down here. And I think to your point, if you're online, the vitriol and nastiness online is severe. The things that people would never say to your face or say out loud, just blam. And it is not, and it's coming. I mean, you have senators now, U.S. senators and members of Congress dropping the F-bomb, calling people sons of bitches. I mean, this is, the president talks like that, we know. But my point is, it's become normal. And so I don't think you're going to get the best of the best to run for office or engage, to your point, in the future, because I think it's a cesspool. I don't know how you see it.
I just want to say something quickly, too, because you kind of sparked something in my mind, and that is when I think to what young people actually want in politics, they want transparency and they want accountability. They don't want to see their concerns or their problems dismissed. And so when you have someone like Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, go before the Justice Committee on Capitol Hill and respond to a Democratic congressman who is asking real, poignant, important questions about victims of sexual assault, and the response from the Attorney General of the United States is to call the congressman a loser, to call him washed up. I mean, that is what people are tired of. And
he was my con law professor, by the way.
Well, and he's a very effective congressman, and I think to young people watching, that's why they don't want to get involved in politics, because they look at this and they say, this is what I'm exposing myself to. And then what's even more, I guess, kind of interesting is people will then turn around just a few minutes later and they'll say, well, why aren't young people involved in politics, or how do we get more young people involved? And we need to fix that in order to make that happen.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you to the audience for the questions. We don't have time for any more audience questions, but I do want to give everyone a chance here for closing remarks. Collective agencies definitely came through in all of your remarks, that Americans have to decide what they amplify, what they choose to believe in, and what's worth them reading. And I think that in itself is just a value of self-governance, and that's something to be proud about of being American. So this is year 250. What do we want to keep up to get to year 300?
I would just close where I began. The battle for reality, for truth, for facts, is the battle for the republic. 250 years in, this July 4th, I think we're going to have to redefine freedom and figure out what parts we keep that are working really, really well, and how we fix the guardrails that have clearly broken down in this last probably decade, but definitely in the last year or so. We're going to have to go forward and fix it.
I'll just say I think it's rather poignant. I'm based in Canada, and I think a lot of what's happening right now is obviously geopolitical tension, and so I think really valuing allies and making sure that when you have countries who share in the belief of a democratic future and of a democratic society, work together instead of calling them names, instead of, even if it is doing it jokingly, calling them the 51st state. I mean, those are things that will alienate, people in the country, and I can tell you, again, being from Canada, a lot of Canadians towards the United States, we love the United States. We feel as if, you've obviously helped us in times of need, but I think a lot of it right now is people want the United States to be that friend, to be that ally that they always have been. And so for everyone here today, I think recognizing the value and the importance of some of your geopolitical allies, and recognizing that, yes, America has a big role to play, but other countries can, bring something to the table as well.
Yeah, and I would just close by noting that, one of the nice things with living in America is that we get another chance at this in November, hopefully. And I definitely think the last year has kind of unified people in opposition to the threat that Trump poses, which is a change of pace from where we were at in the 2024 cycle, where it felt like we had a hard time coming together. And so, if November goes well, which it seems like, I was listening a little bit of what Chris Christie said and some of the reasons why we have optimism that it will, then hopefully a year from now at this conference, we'll be talking about more fun things like, who the Republican nominee in 2028 is going to be, and Trump being a lame duck. So, I'm confident that the elections, despite Trump's efforts to meddle, will happen and will be mostly free. And if they go the way that they seem like they're going to go, then hopefully this is kind of the dark days before the dawn.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.